Father's Promise by Donnalynn Hess. Chapter 27. The Coming of Morning. March 1945. And Jesus delivered him again to his father. Luke 9:42b. Rudy was up and out on the streets before dawn. He had left Salik and his father a note promising them that he would return by evening. He was hoping by that time to have news of his father. Despite everyone's urging for him to be patient, he could not. Since there was really little he could do at such an early hour, he decided to go and see his old neighborhood and apartment. Surely the Germans have moved out by now, he thought. The city was just beginning to come alive. As he walked, he studied the people who were passing, in the hope of discovering some familiar faces. There were none. Seeing the bakery, the clock shop, and Elias's antique shop caused his mind to flood with memories. But they were memories that now seemed very far away. The walk from Salix to his own former home took a lot less time than he had remembered. For that matter, so did getting up to the fourth floor. He now took the stairs 3 at a time. Reaching his old apartment, he grasped the doorknob and tried to turn it. It was locked. Then he noticed the brass nameplate on the door. The name Kaplan had been removed, and a stranger's name was in its place. Slowly he released his hold on the knob and moved toward the stairs. As he did, all the memories of home and his father came back to him, and he sat down on the steps and wept. Once he had regained his composure, he went out again and spent the next hour or so just walking through the streets. He knew that he had done all he could. Still, it did not seem to be enough, and the longer he walked, the more discouraged and sad he became. He did not want to go to the Certisecs in a gloomy mood. They had had enough gloom. So he decided to go and see Anna and Ingrid. They would cheer him up, and he could be back to Salix by dark and in better frame of mind. As he walked along the familiar dirt road that led to Anna's, he thought again of the promise he had made to himself to take her flowers when the war had ended. He determined to pick some. The fields were full of wildflowers, and Rudy knew that they were as beautiful as any he had seen in well-kept gardens. As soon as Rudy entered Anna's cottage, his spirits rose. Ingrid was ecstatic. Anna was kind as ever. "I thought you'd like these," he said, handing her the flowers. "They're beautiful, Rudy," she said. "Just beautiful." She motioned for him to sit down while she went to get a vase for the flowers. As he did so, he took Ingrid on his knee. "I brought you something too," he said to her, taking several smooth stones from his pocket. By the time Anna returned, Ingrid was sitting and happily drawing at the table with Rudy. "I wonder how old she is," Rudy said. "9, I believe." "She doesn't look 9. "Still, she acts about that age," Anna replied. "It's true she's small, but she learns quickly, and you know how well she can draw. Maybe her parents were small." "Maybe," said Rudy. Then he smiled. "If she has to be small, at least she's a girl." "Size doesn't matter much in girls or boys," said Anna in her motherly tone. Rudy nodded. "That's true. Salik's short and awful skinny now, but he's still a great friend." Anna turned. "You found him? You found him then?" she exclaimed. "I did," said Rudy. "He and his father are back in Warsaw." "And his mother?" asked Anna. Rudy shook his head and glanced down. "I'm sorry," she said. There is one good thing," said Rudy. "She had never believed in Christ, but before she died, she did. She turned to him for salvation." Rudy saw that Anna was carefully taking in what he had to say. He was glad of it. Although Anna believed in God, Rudy feared that her beliefs encouraged her to trust in her own goodness. He feared that, like so many others in his country, she had not yet recognized her need to depend solely on Christ for salvation. "My father and I had prayed for them for years," Rudy continued, "but they had never believed. Mr. Certisek was especially antagonistic. He was a leader in the Jewish community, But right before my father was taken, Mr. Sursek seemed to soften. Then, when they were deported, another prisoner again spoke to him of Christ. Rudy related the entire incident to Anna just as Mr. Sursek had told it to him. When he finished, he could tell that she was genuinely moved. He waited for her to speak. When she did not, he decided to continue. You know, he went on, I've known Christ since I was very young, but these past few days I've come to understand more of his love than I've ever known before. We both knew that this war was brutal, but I had no idea thank you, how brutal until I went back into the city. When I returned to Warsaw, I realized how good God had been to me. I never told you of my father's promise, did I? No, said Anna. She was still listening intently. When my father discovered that he was to be deported, he prayed for guidance about what he should do with me. God gave him a promise that if he let me go, I would live to see the end of the war. The verse that assured him of my safety was Psalms 91:1. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I have read that, she said. I had too, many times, said Rudy. Still, I wasn't ready to believe it. I remember my father saying, the forest is God's secret place for you, Rudy. There you shall be under his shadow, where you will be safe. It seemed so unreasonable then, but now I've seen those who come from the camps. They're no more than walking skeletons, and they seem so bewildered and helpless. God not only kept me alive, but he also made me healthy and strong. And your father, she asked hesitantly, did he have such a promise concerning his own safety? No, said Rudy quietly, but I still believe that the same God who kept me under his shadow could have kept my father as well. And I will keep that faith until God shows me otherwise. I admire you and your faith, she said. Rudy felt that he had said enough for the moment, but he determined that he would talk to her on the subject again. Can Ingrid stay here with you until I do locate my father? He asked. She can stay with me as long as you will let her, Anna said. Good. By the way, has Joseph come back? Asked Rudy. Only for his things, Anna said. He said he was going to Germany where he could be free. Rudy shook his head. I wonder if Oscar's right about him, she said. Maybe he is past hope. You mustn't say that, said Rudy. It makes me furious to remember how rude and unkind he's been to you, but even so, I know you and I know you won't give up on him. You love him, though I must admit it's hard for me to see why. Maybe it's because he is named for my husband. She said, and he is family. You love your family. I just can't give up hope on those I love. I understand, and you're right, he said. How about Oscar? Have you seen much of him? Not since he brought your message to me. I thought you might have seen him in Warsaw. Not yet, said Rudy. I intend to, though. I want to thank him for what he did for me, and also to tell him of my father's promise, as I told you. I think it would do him good to hear how God used him. I don't think he'll be eager to give God the credit for your survival, said Anna. I didn't say he'd like hearing it. I just said it would be good. It would do him good, Rudy said, smiling. I should have told him right from the start, but he frightened me a bit when I first knew him. He has a rough exterior. True, said Anna, but you mustn't think that you have failed him. He knew your father's reputation, and he knew what your father believed. Your willingness to learn from him and your courage says a great deal to a man like Oscar. I hope so. What exactly have you done toward finding your father? I've registered with the Jewish Relocation Center, he said, and I've looked through the city for him. And now? She asked. Rudy shrugged. I don't know. I think you do. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you not only believe as your father believes, but that you also do what your father would do, she said. Rudy looked puzzled. Once he'd done all that he could to find you. Once he'd done all that he could to find you, Anna continued. Do you think he would sit around waiting for you or spend his time walking aimlessly through the streets looking for you? No, I guess he wouldn't, Rudy admitted. What would he do then? She asked him. He thought for a moment. I suppose he would do what he could to help the people around him. Exactly, she said. You're the one who said that there's 100 in the city who need help. There are hundreds in the city who need help. My father is a doctor, Anna. I'm not. What can I do? Think, Rudy. Of all that you have learned these past years, you know how to cook. You could help feed people. You've learned how to work with your hands. The houses and buildings in the city certainly could use repair. You told me that you helped your father for several months. You could even work in a hospital if you had a mind to. Anna, he said, getting up to leave, I think you and my father would get along very well. He bent down and kissed her cheek, then turned to Ingrid. He said, I'll be back later this week, and I'll bring you a fresh supply of stones. As he went out, Sasha met him in the dooryard. She leaped against his leg and licked his hands. He was glad to see her, too, but as soon as Ingrid came to the doorway to wave goodbye, Sasha instantly darted away to join her. It was late in the afternoon by the time Rudy again reached Warsaw. On his way to the Certisex, he again passed the building that housed the Jewish relocation office. People were still streaming in and out of it. He stopped and thought for a moment. Can't hurt, he said to himself as he started up the stairs. Excuse me, he said to one man as he entered the room. Do you have something I could write with? The man did not bother to reply, but pointed toward a woman who had just finished writing her name. Ma'am, said Rudy, coming up behind her. May I borrow that for a moment? She gave him the worn chalk-like stone without comment and walked away. He sighed deeply, and again his heart grew heavy with sadness of those around him. Anna certainly had a point. He had no right to waste time moping with so many people all around him who were in need. With new resolve, he raised his hand and wrote boldly on the wall, Rudy Kaplan is alive, Psalm 91:1. Of course he is, a man behind him said, and he has grown as well. Rudy stopped, afraid for a moment to turn around, afraid that he would find a stranger, but he felt a hand upon his shoulder. He turned. It was no stranger. Papa, he said, almost in a whisper. Although his father was as thin and gaunt as others who had suffered in the Nazi camps, there was yet laughter in his eyes as he reached out to touch Rudy's cheek. Still no beard, he said, smiling. Rudy took his father in his arms. Ah, Papa, he said, holding him close, I now have your stature and mother's wit. I do not need a beard.